In 1985, a guy with no company, no product, and one stubborn idea about coffee walked into pitch meeting after pitch meeting, trying to raise $400,000. 242 investors heard his pitch. 217 of them said no. He kept going anyway. Today, the company built out of that idea is worth more than $100 billion, over 35,000 stores, in more than 80 countries, one of the most recognized brands on earth. But to understand why he refused to quit, you have to go back almost 20 years earlier, to a public housing project in Brooklyn, and a 7-year-old kid watching his family lose everything because his father broke his ankle at work. This is the story of Howard Schultz, and how getting told no 217 times turned into a $100 billion company. Howard Schultz didn't grow up around coffee, money, or business. He grew up in the Bayview housing projects in Brooklyn, New York, one of 3 kids in a family that was always one bad week away from real trouble. That bad week came when he was 7. His father, who worked as a truck driver, broke his ankle on the job. Back then, there was no safety net waiting to catch a family like the Schultzes. No health insurance. No paid leave. No compensation. The injury didn't just hurt his father. It took the income away from the entire household at the exact moment they needed it most. Schultz has talked about that memory for decades, and it's not hard to see why. It's the kind of moment that either breaks a kid's view of the world or rewires it completely. For Schultz, it became something close to an obsession. The idea that the way companies treat their workers when things go wrong says everything about who they really are. He got out of Brooklyn on a football scholarship to Northern Michigan University, didn't end up playing, worked his way through school on loans and odd jobs, and moved into sales after graduating, first at Xerox, then at a Swedish housewares company called Hemaplast. It was that housewares job, of all things, that put Howard Schultz on a collision course with a tiny Seattle coffee bean retailer that was about to become the center of his entire life. Here's the twist most people don't know. Howard Schultz did not found Starbucks. He wasn't even close to first. When he joined the company in 1982 as Director of Retail Operations and Marketing, Starbucks was already over a decade old, 6 stores in Seattle, selling whole bean coffee and equipment. No espresso drinks. No sitting down. No experience. Just bags of beans. Then, in 1983, Schultz took a business trip to Milan, Italy, and everything changed. He walked into Italian espresso bars and saw something that didn't exist anywhere in America. Baristas who knew every regular by name. Crowds of people standing shoulder to shoulder over tiny cups of espresso. Coffee treated less like a product and more like a daily ritual that stitched a neighborhood together. Schultz came back to Seattle convinced he'd seen the future. He pitched the Starbucks founders on turning their bean shop into exactly that. An espresso bar, a gathering place, a third place between home and work. They said no. Not out of stupidity. Starbucks' original owners believed deeply in coffee as a product, a craft, something you brewed carefully at home. Turning it into a café, in their eyes, would dilute what they'd built. Schultz eventually convinced them to let him test the idea in a single downtown Seattle store. It worked immediately. Lines out the door. And the owners still didn't want to expand it. For Schultz, that rejection wasn't the end of the idea. It was the moment the idea became personal. In 1985, Howard Schultz did something that should terrify anyone who's ever had a good idea shot down by their own boss. He quit, with no backup plan, to go build the thing himself. He needed $400,000. He didn't have it. So he did the only thing left to do. He pitched investors, one at a time, over and over. He approached 242 potential investors. 217 of them said no. Read that again. Not 17. 217 rejections to a guy with no company, no product on shelves, and an idea that sounded, to most people in 1985, like what if a coffee shop, but Italian. Most people would have taken that as the universe delivering a very clear message. Schultz kept going. Eventually, the money came together, including in an almost poetic twist, an investment from the very Starbucks founders who'd said no to his original pitch. In 1986, he opened his own company, Illinois Journal, Italian for the daily. Standing espresso bars. Italian music playing overhead. The exact ritual he'd fallen in love with in Milan, rebuilt from scratch on American soil. It worked. A second store opened in Seattle. A third opened in Vancouver. Schultz had built, from nothing, proof that his rejected idea was right all along. And that's when fate handed him something even bigger than he was looking for. In 1987, word got back to Schultz that the original Starbucks owners were looking to sell. All of it. 6, by then 11, stores, the name, the brand, the whole company that had told him his big idea wasn't worth pursuing. Schultz didn't hesitate. He put together a group of investors and bought Starbucks outright for $3.8 million. Then he did something that still sounds almost too clean to be true. He merged his own company, Illinois Journal, into the Starbucks he'd just purchased, and became its chairman and CEO. Think about the shape of that story for a second. A guy walks into a company as an employee, falls in love with an idea nobody there wants, gets told no, quits, builds his own version from scratch, one rejected pitch at a time, then buys the very company that rejected him and rebuilds it entirely around the idea they didn't believe in. That's not a metaphor. That's literally what happened, on paper, in 1987. Here's the part of the story that turns this from a good business comeback into something genuinely wholesome. Schultz never stopped thinking about his father's broken ankle. As Starbucks grew from 11 stores into a national chain, he made a decision that was almost unheard of in American retail at the time. Starbucks would offer health insurance and stock options to part-time employees, not just full-timers. Baristas working 20 hours a week, the exact kind of job his own father had been let go from without a second thought, would get real benefits. It wasn't just good PR. It came directly from that one afternoon in Brooklyn when Schultz was 7 years old and watched his family lose everything because a company felt no obligation to the person who got hurt working for them. Under Schultz, Starbucks grew from 11 stores to tens of thousands across more than 80 countries, built the third place concept into one of the most recognizable ideas in modern retail, and turned getting coffee into a daily ritual for hundreds of millions of people who had never set foot in Milan. It's a genuinely rare thing in business history, an empire built by someone who never stopped remembering exactly why he started. 217 rejections. One idea nobody wanted. And a $100 billion company on the other side of it. Howard Schultz's story is proof that sometimes the biggest empires get built by the people who get told no the most, and simply refuse to accept it as the final answer. And if you want more videos exposing the real mechanics behind the world's biggest businesses, subscribe. There are far more exciting stories than Howard Schultz and Starbucks still waiting to be told. I'll see you in the next one.